What's your favorite scary movie?
The horror genre has captivated audiences around the world since the early days of cinema. Stories of monsters and serial killers lurking around normal neighborhoods and towns, stalking normal people like you and me, makes these films relatable in a very uneasy sense. They tap into the darkest corners of our minds, subjecting us to imagery and situations that are in fact our worst nightmares. In a very odd way, this is why they're so intriguing to so many of us. The thrill you get from being scared but also being able to imagine yourself in that situation is what keeps people coming back. In 1996, a movie as much satire as it was true horror hit theaters everywhere. Directed by Wes Craven, who was also responsible for A Nightmare on Elm Street, the film challenges horror stereotypes and cliches, as well as breathing some fresh air into a sometimes repetitive genre. It follows a group of high school students in California who are being stalked by a vicious killer that is referred to as Ghostface, a mysterious masked entity that toys with the teens before brutally slaughtering them, typically with a large knife. The film was written by Kevin Williamson, a huge fan of horror movies, especially slasher films like John Carpenter's Halloween, released in 1979. It is said that he was influenced by these films to want to write one of his own. In March of 1994, Williamson became absorbed in a news program that was covering the story of a drifter who murdered 5 college students in the town of Gainesville, Florida in 1990. He was inspired by the morbid case so much that he felt compelled to create the story of the now massively successful film known as Scream. This is the true story that inspired that movie. This is the case of Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper. In 1954, in Shreveport, Louisiana, a boy named Danny was born to a 19-year-old woman named Claudia Rolling and her husband James Rolling, who was a police officer as well as a decorated veteran from the Korean War. It is believed that James may have suffered some combination of post-traumatic stress disorder and inherent mental illness. He was said to be temperamental and violent, abusing Claudia as well as telling Danny that he was unwanted from birth. Claudia went to the hospital one afternoon after claiming that James had tried to force her to cut herself with a razor blade. Though she suffered constant abuse at his hands, she remained married to him, allegedly trying to leave multiple times before always returning back. This left Danny and his younger brother Kevin also under constant abuse from their father in a home they couldn't escape. Danny turned to art and music for solace. He recalled the memory of receiving a guitar for Christmas at the age of 15 as one of the happiest moments of his adolescence. Really, actually, only one of the few happy times during that point in his life. In combination with his creative outlets, he claims to have also developed multiple personalities as a defense from the nightmarish reality that surrounded him in his life. He believes that he was able to disconnect from reality when things got to be too much, but this unfortunately caused a downward spiral in his life. With his many mental issues, Danny had trouble trying to assimilate into society and hold down a steady job. He entered the Air Force but was kicked out in 1972 when he was busted for drug possession, after which he went to live with his grandfather. During this time, he found some stability when he began going to church, and he married a woman named Omather Halko. They had a daughter together, and all seemed to be going in an upward direction for Danny, but unfortunately, not for long. With Danny's troubled upbringing, he sadly brought what he witnessed between his father and mother into his own marriage. He began to abuse his wife as his father did, which only drove her away, causing a nasty divorce. The divorce really affected Danny in a negative way, and he took a turn for the worst when he sexually assaulted a woman who resembled his ex-wife, as well as embarking on several armed robberies in Georgia, leading to his incarceration in 1979. After being released, Danny was arrested several more times in Alabama and Mississippi for more armed robberies. Between stints in jail, he spent his time traveling, stealing, and occasionally forcing himself onto women. In 1989, Danny was fired from his job at Pancho's restaurant in Shreveport, which sent him into a rage. That same night, he entered the home of the Grissom family before stabbing 55-year-old William, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean to death as they prepared for dinner that night. Julie's body had been mutilated before it was posed in a provocative position. The other bodies were not touched. He did not confess to these murders until 1997. In May of 1990, Danny and his father got into one final argument with each other. Things got very heated, which made Danny extremely angry. He pulled out a gun and shot his father in the stomach and head. His father amazingly survived, but lost an eye and an ear in the altercation. In August of 1990, Danny set up a campsite in a wooded area behind the University of Florida. As the students began to return to school for their fall semester, he embarked on a vicious murder spree. On Friday, August 24th, 1990, Danny broke into the apartment shared by University of Florida freshmen Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. He found Powell asleep on the downstairs couch. He stood over her but decided not to wake her, before heading upstairs to explore the bedroom where Larson was sleeping. Danny taped her mouth shut before brutally attacking her with a knife. She was stabbed to death, dying in a panic as she tried to fight him off. After killing Larson, Danny went back downstairs where he found Powell still asleep on the couch. He taped her mouth shut before binding her wrists together behind her back. She was sexually assaulted before he stabbed her 5 times in the back, killing her. He posed both bodies in provocative positions and took a shower in their apartment before he finally left. The following morning, he broke into the apartment of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt by prying open her sliding glass door with a knife and a screwdriver. She wasn't home when he arrived, so he waited for her to return in the living room. At about 11 a.m., Hoyt entered the apartment. Danny surprised her and grabbed her from behind, placing her in a chokehold. He then forcibly taped her mouth shut and bound her wrists together as he had done with Christina Powell. Almost identical to Powell's murder, he sexually assaulted Hoyt before stabbing her in the back, though he used even more force stabbing Hoyt. Her heart was ruptured from the stabs to the back, which killed her. After leaving the apartment, Danny returned to his campsite where he realized he couldn't find his wallet. He became anxious, thinking that he may have left it at the crime scene in Hoyt's apartment, so he returned to look for it. When he saw Hoyt's dead body laying on the bed, he decided to decapitate her and pose her head on the shelf in the bedroom and positioned it facing her body to add to the shock factor and further disturb whoever had the misfortune of finding her. A widespread panic around the campus had now begun as the news of the murders began to circulate. Many students began taking extra precautions, from changing daily routines to sleeping together in groups. Some students even withdrew their enrollment at the university and transferred to other schools out of fear of being killed. On the 27th of August, Danny targeted the apartment of 23-year-old Tracy Pauls, who lived with her 23-year-old male roommate, Manny Taboda. Similar to the Hoyt murder, he entered through the sliding glass door by use of a knife and a screwdriver. Danny found Taboda asleep in one of the bedrooms. He attacked Taboda, who put up a fight against Danny, but he was unfortunately overwhelmed and lost his life in the altercation. Pauls, hearing the commotion, ran down the hall into Taboda's bedroom. There she saw Danny standing over his body, so she ran back to her bedroom where she tried to barricade the door. Danny followed and was able to break down the door before taping her mouth and wrists, as with all the other women. He sexually assaulted her as well before he stabbed her 3 times in the back, killing her. He posed her body before leaving, but didn't touch the body of Taboda. His body was left exactly how he had died. This was the last attack on the students at the university. In November of 1990, a tip was left by Shreveport resident Cindy Jurisic, telling authorities to look into Danny Rolling for the murders. She had met Danny at her church and recalled him making disturbing comments to her and her then husband, Stephen Dobbin. Dobbin told her that Rolling had told him that he had a problem. He told Dobbin that he liked to stick knives into people. Judy said she had a strange hunch that he was involved with the murders to the point that it wouldn't let her rest, so she finally contacted police. In response to the tip, police found Danny, who was already in the Marion County Jail after robbing a supermarket in Ocala, Florida, 10 days after the last murders. His blood matched DNA found at the murder scenes, and tools that he had used to rob a bank the day of Krista Hoyt's murder, specifically a screwdriver, matched marks left on the sliding doors of the apartments he broke into. Audio diaries kept by Danny were also found by investigators, on which he alluded to the crimes. In February of 1994, Danny was set to go to trial for the murders. Unexpectedly, he abruptly changed his plea to guilty, admitting to the murders in Gainesville. His mother gave her testimony at the trial as jurors tried to determine a sentence. She recounted the abuse that he had received at the hands of his father. A psychiatrist also spoke, who described an alternate personality of Danny's that he called Gemini, that pushed him to carry out these horrendous acts. 2 other psychiatrists also testified that Danny suffered from a severe personality disorder, but also stated that they believed that he had the ability to understand the magnitude of his crimes. The jury unanimously found Danny Rolling guilty of first-degree murder on all 5 counts in late March. He was sentenced to death. On October 25, 2006, Danny was executed. Instead of final words, he sang a religious hymn to the 47 people watching from the witness room before his microphone was cut off and his life was taken, ending the twisted story of Danny Rolling.